By the early 90s, the adventure genre was ruled by two companies, Sierra Online and LucasArts. While Sierra had a range of different games with different tones, LucasArts had focused on making cartoony adventures with simple mechanics and lots of humor. The result was an explosion in the company's popularity, as titles like Monkey Island became icons of the PC space. However, just by their nature, the LucasArts games seemed to be skewing the genre younger. But there were others who wanted to swing the other direction, making more sophisticated games for a more mature audience. And while this trend took many forms, its greatest achievement would not only change gaming, but computing technology as a whole. For whatever reason, most of the games intended for mature audiences released in 1993. In April of that year, developer Trilobite released The Seventh Guest, and it was just about as far from a friendly LucasArts game as you could get. The story of an amnesiac exploring the haunted mansion of a murderer who made children's dolls for a living. It was twisted, it was creepy, and it was not for the kiddies. But it presented it all with an unprecedented use of pre-rendered 3D graphics, alongside live-action video. Compared to the sprites of Sierra and LucasArts, it was a revolution in interactive visuals. That much graphical data just couldn't fit onto floppy disks. So The Seventh Guest was one of the very first games to be exclusively on compact discs, or CDs. CDs could hold far more data than floppies, and could handle all the pre-rendered and recorded goodness of the game. The resulting game made an impact on the industry, eventually selling a fantastic 2 million copies. No less than Bill Gates called it, quote, the new standard in interactive entertainment. More importantly, it convinced more than a few customers to buy CD-ROMs, or computers that came with CD-ROMs. Trilobite, however, was staffed by professional game developers. The biggest revolution of them all would come from a couple of guys in their garage. Robin and Rand Miller wanted to make an epic experience that was built on mythology and mystery, not bloodshed. They had never been fans of senseless violence, and wanted to prove that an engaging and exciting game could be produced without it. They managed to convince Japanese publisher Sunsoft that they knew what they were doing, and received a $350,000 seed investment from them. Meanwhile, they managed to do the same thing with US publisher Broderbund. Sunsoft would get the console publishing rights, and Broderbund the PC rights. Even with all that cash at their disposal now, they still didn't have very much to work with. The Millers and their small team of friends, together calling themselves Cyan, would go on to produce their epic masterpiece as cheaply as possible, working out of their garages, buying used equipment, and crafting sound effects out of household items. They spent a huge amount of time creating incredibly detailed works of 3D art, and a large amount of video files as well. What's more, they wanted that detail to translate to more than just visuals. A full backstory and lore was worked out for the game. But Cyan didn't want to just tell all this to the player. Exploration and discovery would be the cornerstones of their non-violent epic, and it would be up to players to seek out information about the world they were in. And that world would be as beautiful and mysterious as their artists could possibly make it. Cyan went even further. Once players were dropped into this world, they were given no instructions. None. What were they supposed to do? Where were they supposed to go? What was going on? It was up to the players to figure all this out, all on their own. It was a demand on the audience that most developers bent over backwards to avoid. Cyan embraced it. They wanted to challenge players in ways that few games ever did. Still, Cyan was realistic. Without Twitch reaction gameplay, zany comedy, or basic direction, their game was going to be a niche product. Those with long attention spans and a curious intellect would find it appealing, but the mainstream would pass it by. Thus, they expected the game to sell a decent, but not great, 100,000 units. But Cyan and their publishers were okay with that, and the developer could rest assured that they hadn't compromised on their artistic vision. Myst released in September 1993, and, like The Seventh Guest, was only available on CD. This should have shrunk its market even further, but instead, a phenomenon unfolded. To the surprise of all involved, Myst became one of those rare works of art that became a mainstream smash without ever intending to be. For some reason, a game that forced players to figure out what it even was captured imaginations the world over. The puzzles were so involved that players would often keep detailed notebooks on everything that they discovered. It helped that the game's pre-rendered graphics and exquisitely detailed artwork were unprecedented. Very quickly, Myst became the go-to product for computer enthusiasts looking to show off their latest rig. Debating the game's strange world became a water cooler event the world over. Cyan had expected Myst to sell 100,000 copies. In the end, it sold a staggering 8 million units. This was not only enough to make Myst the single best-selling PC game in history, but was enough to keep it that way for the rest of the 90s. It helped spur the CD-ROM movement, so that most PCs came with the drive by the middle of the decade. This in itself gave Myst an importance far beyond just gaming. Home computing as a whole was improved by the widespread adoption of CDs over the older floppy disks. This in turn paved the way for the rapid adoption of DVD-ROMs a few years later. Cyan was suddenly the hottest developer in the world, and unsurprisingly, the studio went on to create a number of sequels to Myst over the following years. Meanwhile, the old master of the genre was trying to reinvent it in a new way. In December 1993, Sierra Online released Gabriel Knight: Sins of the Fathers. While made with 2D sprites and an older interface, it was nevertheless a huge leap forward for the company. Instead of knights rescuing princesses in a fairy tale world, Gabriel Knight featured a modern-day novelist trying to solve a murder in a decaying city's seedy underbelly. In terms of tone and feel, this was a much more complex and mature experience than anything Sierra had done before. While Gabriel Knight never sold like King's Quest, it is often looked back on as one of the studio's finest achievements and a landmark moment for sophisticated content in gaming. But even as Gabriel Knight continued on with sequels, Sierra was looking to reclaim the crown. They weren't leading the market the way they had back in the 80s. And so, Sierra tried to seize hold of the newest trends and do it better than anyone else. 1995's Phantasmagoria featured pre-rendered 3D graphics and live-action video as other games had done. But Sierra tried to do it all with even greater flair, going so far as to make the main character a visible, real-life actor. This required a huge investment in resources, and also made creating the game a logistical nightmare. Beyond even this, Sierra wanted to push the adult trend in gaming to the hilt, and so the game featured scenes of bloody murder and rape. All told, it was a wildly ambitious, expensive, violent turn for the company, one which took 4 years and $4 million to make. And it didn't work. Phantasmagoria was considered atrocious, an exploitative, melodramatic mess. The compositing of live action onto 3D graphics was, at best, subpar, and the controls weren't much better. Even the story, always one of Sierra's strongest traits, was clunky. Of course, including rape in a video game did not go over well in many circles, with many citing it as morally irresponsible. Still, it managed to sell 1 million units at the upmarked price of $70. Despite the financial success, Phantasmagoria was in many ways a bookend to the golden years of adventure gaming. Shortly after its release, Ken Williams sold Sierra to CUC International. Under new management, Sierra started producing lower quality games. Meanwhile, more and more developers were shifting to 3D graphics, after Myst had proven the popularity of the look. But though the adventure genre had pioneered the visuals, it would soon find that the shift to 3D would leave it behind for good. Tune in next time to see the end of a genre.